immediate questions, you can use the question and answer tool to ask those. To find the question and answer tool, just look, if you're on your computer or your iPhone, just look at the bottom middle of your screen, and you should see a button that has two chat bubbles with the letters Q and A underneath. And then if you would like to post a question, you just open that and write your question in there, and then we will be able to answer that during the session. In the meantime, please hang tight and we'll get started shortly while we wait for some more folks to join us. Thanks so much. All right, thanks so much everybody for joining us. This is the second forum for the Writing Your Downtown project. We're very excited to have you here with us today. We will be getting started shortly while we just wait for some more folks to join us. In the meantime, please feel free to ask any immediate questions that you have using the Q&A. You can access that by looking at the bottom middle of your screen if you are on your computer or on your smartphone. If you're on your tablet, it will be in the top middle of your screen. The Q&A is where you'll be able to ask questions throughout the presentation, and the panelists will be watching the Q&A and will be addressing questions in a question answer period during the forum. In the meantime, please hang tight while we wait for some more folks to join us, and then we'll get started. Thanks so much.
All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started now. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Karina Oliver Milchman. I am the Chief of Housing and Neighborhood Development at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. That's the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. And you've just been hearing from my colleague, Christian Brandt, in our Community Engagement Department, who will also be talking with us tonight. So before we get going, I just want to go over our agenda and a little bit of background on this process. The town of Reading invited MAPC to provide support with community engagement for this Your Downtown project. So far, we've had an online panel with developers back in October that about 65 people attended, and we took lots of questions from the audience. It was a great event. We also had a survey that focused on a vision for the downtown and priorities, and that was open from October 19th to November 8th. And we're going to go into the results of that survey tonight. And we're also going to hear tonight from the town on zoning proposals that CPDC will consider later this month. And we'll do some polling to hear from you on these ideas. So before we get going, just some basic tech information. This is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So you're muted and you have no video. You can only see panelists and presenters and facilitators and so forth, but you will be able to ask questions of the speakers via the Q&A function, which looks like this. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Oh, I'm not advancing. Here we go. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen and on the right-hand side. So if you click that, you'll be able to put a question into the box that opens up, and we will get to as many questions as time permits tonight, while making sure we share all the information we have to share with you and also do the polls that we want to get to. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jean Dolios, Assistant Town Manager, and she'll kick things off with a welcome.
Thank you, Karina. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. We're very excited to have this opportunity to have a conversation and to get feedback and to share some data that we're really going to take a deep dive into tonight. My name is Jean Delios. I'm the Assistant Town Manager for the Town of Reading. And this is the Your Downtown project. This project is a community engagement effort designed to solicit feedback on our downtown smart growth 40R zoning. In response to some feedback that we've heard, including 2 instructional motions from town meeting, we've been reaching out to the community to get input on the downtown smart growth zoning. A zoning workshop was hosted by Cpdc last spring, and we hired MAPC to work with us on community engagement, and we're very pleased to have their expertise to add to the team. We did a number of things to reach out to the community, including a survey. And we mailed postcards to the residents. Over 9,000 households in Reading received this postcard inviting them to participate in a community survey. And that included homeowners as well as renters. We received over 1,000 responses, which was a very robust response. We held focus groups. This is our second public forum, and all of this really is aimed at trying to get the pulse of the community. With lots of data and feedback collected as part of this effort, we're excited about the next steps in the process. The Community Planning and Development Commission, CPDC, will hold a public hearing on Monday, December 6th at 8:30. The meeting starts earlier than that with other agenda items, but this topic will be on for 8:30 in the form of a public hearing. You can join over Zoom or attend the meeting in person at Town Hall in the Select Board meeting room. Once the CPDC starts the public hearing process, the plan is that they would then make a recommendation to town meeting at annual town meeting in April of 2022. Tonight, we're going to talk about how zoning can be used to advance priorities, and we'll preview potential zoning amendments to the Downtown 40R Smart Growth District. Thanks to all of you for coming tonight and for our panel. And now I'm going to pass it back to Karina.
Okay, thank you so much, Jean. And I'm just going to go back a slide since they weren't progressing before, so folks can see the agenda. So we heard from Jean. I'm going to go briefly over some basic history pertaining to the Downtown Smart Growth District and its relationship to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40R. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Christian, who's going to go over the input we received via the survey on a vision for downtown and priorities. And then I will hand it over to town staff, including Julie Mercier and Andrew McNichol, to go over some zoning amendment proposals, and we'll do some polling to hear your thoughts on those, and we'll end with next steps. All right, so I'm going to advance quickly here to history. So going way back to 2005, I wanted to highlight some of the master plan goals that were really advanced through the zoning of the Downtown Smart Growth District. So the master plan has as its goals managing growth, improving the downtown specifically, introducing mixed-use zoning, increasing affordable housing, promoting housing diversity, and preserving architecture and village character. And then in pursuing rezoning of the downtown, there were several specific goals that also advanced master plan objectives. And the first was to increase activity in the downtown and address properties that had become vacant in order to rebuild the walkable center that the downtown historically has been. The second was to ensure development occurs in an appropriate smart growth location, such as your town center, but also in proximity to the commuter rail station, in order to also preserve other areas of town, either existing as they exist now or for open space and advancing other community priorities. And the third was focused on housing, and there was an objective to meet housing need and demand through development in the downtown by creating opportunities for seniors to downsize, affordable homes for moderate and lower income households, and starter homes for other people. So the zoning project began back in 2007. And it entailed numerous public meetings. The topic was regularly on the Community Planning and Development Commission's agenda. And then it was expanded in 2017 after several public workshops about the district and at the recommendation of the select board and after a public hearing. And so it was originally 26 acres and it was expanded to 48 acres. Another change that occurred then was that the affordable housing requirement was increased from 20% to 25% in rental developments of more than 12 units. And developers of ownership housing were still required to income restrict 20% of units. And then shortly thereafter, between about 2018 and 2020, the design guidelines were updated to consider the district edges and transitional areas. So a quick snapshot of the main attributes of the district. It's relatively small, it's about 48 acres. About a quarter of that is substantially developed already, and 40% of that is public, like streets and right-of-ways. 35% is considered developable. As I mentioned, it includes the commuter rail station, and so there's been, all the development has been transit-oriented development. And the lots or the parcels in the district tend to be smaller. The median size is about 6,300 square feet, and the average is about 10,300 square feet. So once the zoning was passed, there were a couple waves of development. The first began in 2010, and it brought us projects like 30 Haven, Rise 47, and Postmark. And then in 2020, we saw a second wave that brought the Chronicle, 18 Woburn, and 2 Haven. And with this development, we saw a number of benefits and successes in the downtown. First, a number of housing opportunities were created, 192 homes, of which 43 are affordable. And those housing opportunities brought new residents who in turn help support local businesses and are creating activity and vibrancy in the downtown. The new development also created commercial space, about 42,000 square feet through mixed use development. So now just to go over what Chapter 40R is, because the zoning in the district is Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40R, Smart Growth Zoning. And so I want to make sure we're on the same page about what benefits and opportunities that presents Reading, and also what regulations are entailed. So the law is designed to encourage communities to create dense residential or mixed-use smart growth districts that include a substantial amount of affordable housing proportionately, and they need to be in a suitable location, like near a transit station or an area of concentrated development, for example. There are many benefits of adopting 40R zoning, as the town of Reading did. It concentrates development, which creates a distinctive sense of place and helps meet market demand for walkability and convenience while reducing car trips. It provides multifamily housing options, often rental housing, and it helps maintain the 10% affordable housing requirement the state has for municipalities. The location requirements of 40R help direct and consolidate growth and development, which allows other areas to be preserved. It also allows municipalities a fair bit of authority to determine where development occurs and to use dimensional controls waiver criteria, and design guidelines to really shape what development is and what it looks like. The by right nature of development or development with limited plan review, as is required for 40R districts, sets clear expectations for developers and helps them avoid unexpected hurdles. And then there are also financial incentives to communities to adopt 40R, both for adopting the zoning and for housing that's built within the district. It also, as you probably recall, 40R explicitly advances several master plan objectives and downtown objectives that the town had independently before they rezoned it in accordance with 40R. And those were introducing mixed-use development and increasing activity, increasing affordable housing and housing diversity, and meeting housing need and demand while managing growth. So the benefits we've gone over, there are also some parameters. The first is that development has to be by right, as I said, or with limited site plan review, and it has to be 20 units per acre for multifamily development. Also, affordable housing is a requirement, and it has to be at least 20% of new units within the district that are deed restricted to households at or below 80% of the area median income, which is about $91,000 for a 3-person household. And then finally, and this is key, development must be feasible. So the law actually says that the town cannot unreasonably impair development by diminishing the economic feasibility of proposed projects through the zoning or the design guidelines. So an example of diminishing financial feasibility might be requiring affordable housing at a very high proportion of new units without offering sufficient density to offset those costs. Or it could be made infeasible through dimensional regulations, such as setbacks or lot coverage that make development not pencil out financially. So that's sort of the constraints that we're working under as we consider zoning changes to the district. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Christian to take us through our survey results from the survey released earlier this fall.
Awesome, thank you, Karina. There we go. So as we are diving into the survey, if you could advance to the next slide. I think that it's important to note that the survey is not intended, this survey, and in fact, most of the surveys that MAPC does and that municipalities in the region do, is not intended to be statistically significant. And so basically what that means is that even though there are so many responses, these surveys are really intended to get a general feel from the participants how they are responding to the questions. They're not necessarily intended to draw broad, statistically defensible conclusions about any of the things that we're asking about. And then the other thing that I'll mention is that there were, as you can see on the screen, there were 1,127 total respondents. We didn't require that people answer every question, and so you will notice that on the slides, between 600 and 700 respondents answered any individual question. Or excuse me, between 600 and 700 people answered each specific question. But that all told, there were 1,127 people who started the survey. So that represents a pretty significant, even at 700 people, that represents a pretty significant pool of insight and wisdom for us to draw from. So we are excited about that number as well. So just to get us started, 98% of the folks who responded to the demographic questions on this survey identified themselves as Reading residents. 3% are indicated they were business owners within the Smart Growth District. And unsurprisingly, 93% are homeowners, 5% are renters, and then there were a handful of folks who said that they were other. And as you can see on the chart, 81% of the folks who responded indicated that they were white. And then the next highest percentage was respondents who preferred not to say. And then there were some other respondents in some of the other categories as well. So next slide. So about 3/4 of the respondents have lived in Reading for at least the last 11 years, and many more for more than 21 years. So we're hearing from folks who've lived in Reading from all amounts of time. A minority of respondents lived within the district. Only 5% of the folks who responded to the demographic questions indicated that they lived within the smart growth district. Most live north of downtown or west of Main Street, but there's generally folks who took the survey from all over Reading. Next slide. So most of the respondents are between the ages of 35 and 64. That's a pretty wide swath of ages, so that's not super surprising to us. We did get about 11% of folks who were 25 to 34, and then about 20% of folks were 65 to 79. And there were 1% of survey respondents who identified themselves as being 80 or older. Most folks indicated that they make at least $75,000 a year. And in fact, more than 60% of respondents indicated that they had incomes over $150,000. Next slide. So overall, most people who took the survey indicated that they felt that from their personal experience, the downtown smart growth district is working at least moderately well. 66% of folks felt that way. And that includes the people who were who selected moderately, very, or extremely well. And so for those folks who felt that it's working moderately, slightly well, or not well at all, we heard from them in the survey through a follow-up question that they would like more parking, more open space, less boxy architecture, less density, and greater commercial diversity. And some of these are some topics that have come up pretty consistently throughout the survey. And so you'll see that reflected in some of the responses later as well. Next slide. So this is the vision that for the downtown smart growth district. And I know that the text is a little small, so I am going to read it, although this was also on the survey. So just really quickly, the Reading Downtown Smart Growth District is designed to be a walkable, mixed-use neighborhood, active both day and night, drawing people to the train station and providing convenience to the public. It is a great place to live for residents at different life stages and with a range of incomes, and it is a destination for local shopping, arts, and culture and events. The DSGD is a people, pedestrian, and bicyclist-friendly area with residential foot traffic and adequate parking to support businesses, with inclusive green spaces to gather in, both within and surrounding the area, and architectural elements that promote pedestrian comfort. The district feels open and inviting to all. So I think it's important to note that this is a vision statement, which is a high-level inspirational statement about an idealistic future. And it was drafted in response to input received at the zoning workshop. But it also builds on prior processes in the DSGD, and it acknowledges ongoing developer interest and housing need and demand in the town. Next slide. So we put this vision out to survey participants, and just to ask them how they felt about that vision statement. And at least 80% of respondents felt that the vision statement matched their vision for the DSGD moderately, very, or extremely closely. And you'll also notice that the highest response category was very closely. So generally speaking, people who took the survey feel that the vision is something that, that they're on board with. Next slide. So the vast majority of respondents, 77%, felt that the current zoning is creating a vibrant and pedestrian-friendly downtown. So these questions are really about sort of specific elements of the vision. And so you can see in the slide that the majority of respondents felt that the vibrancy and pedestrian comfort in the downtown was moderately to extremely well implemented under the DSGD. Next slide. All right, so more than half of respondents, 54%, thought that the current guidelines have produced the open space that they want in the DSGD. We did ask some follow-up questions to this, which I'll get into in a little bit, but you can see on the chart in front of us what the various different response rates were. Next slide. So getting into a little bit more detail about open space, we also asked what trade-offs would you accept to yield more open space in downtown, and that is the chart that you see in front of you. And in exchange for more open space, most respondents indicated that they would accept smaller open spaces and more numerous, smaller but more numerous ones, such as green strips or parklets, taller buildings, or private open space. Reduced parking, which was the fourth option, was ranked the lowest by a pretty large amount, actually. Respondents felt that the following open spaces are priorities for the town to pursue, and those include publicly accessible parks or plazas, outdoor dining, and greenery, even if it's not usable. So these were part of another question asking people to rank specific elements of open space to consider. And those were the ones that came out as the ones with the highest preference. Next slide. So we asked a bunch of questions about, we asked another question about open space in exchange for greater density, and whether or not that would be palatable to participants in the survey. And respondents indicated that they would accept more open space, among other responses as well, which we'll get into later in the presentation. Next slide. So the vast majority of people, the next set of questions are all about setbacks. The vast majority of respondents, 73%, thought that the current setback requirements are creating a downtown that's comfortable for pedestrians. So that would include folks who responded moderately, very, or extremely well. Next slide. And then of the people who responded that they thought setbacks should be reconsidered, we asked those respondents a follow-up question, and most want setbacks to create a feeling of openness or provide visual interest through landscaping. And this is actually consistent with input wanting to look at open space, but setbacks are not necessarily the right tool to get usable open space, which is what we heard from folks in the one of the previous questions about what kinds of open space they wanted to prioritize. And so the town is going to share some more ideas on how to consider open space later on in this presentation. And just to note, a small number of respondents to that last question thought that setbacks should be, oh, I already addressed this. Keep going, sorry. So most respondents thought that the current lot coverage requirements have created desirable development and comfortable for the development in the downtown. So these questions are all about how to think about the lot coverage, how we should be thinking about the lot coverage in the DSGD. Next slide. And so similarly to the last one, we did ask folks who indicated that they weren't, that they didn't think that the current approach was that they thought it was either doing slightly well or not well at all. Those folks were asked a follow-up question about what they would like to see if they want to have lot coverage reconsidered. And of those respondents who want lot coverage considered, most wanted green space or more parking, and another group said that they just didn't like the scale of development. So those three responses were pretty evenly spread, from 26% with parking to 33% with the scale of development. And then we did ask some other folks about, we did give people the option to say some other use, and in that response, most of those folks indicated that they wanted restaurants or dining options to be created this way. And so this is potentially something that the town could use to get more outdoor dining. So even though we didn't ask about that explicitly in this question, that did show up a lot in the responses to the some other use category. Next slide. So another question about lot coverage involved reducing the lot coverage by building some pavement, and asking folks what they would accept in order to to reduce the lot coverage, and the options for taller buildings, reduced parking, or other. And about 49% of the folks who responded to this question said taller buildings. So that's nearly half would accept taller buildings to reduce lot coverage. And then there were quite a few responses in the other category. And most of the folks who responded to this didn't sort of added additional comment. The responses were not necessarily offering another sort of concrete trade-off to be considered. So that is sort of a big overview of the general results of the survey. And I believe that is the next slide is about the zoning amendment. So I will pass this over to Andrew to discuss that.
Thank you, Christian. We do have one question in the Q&A kind of related a bit to the survey, if we can, from Naomi Kaufman. The survey responses for several questions. The moderate category could also be interpreted as dissatisfied rather than satisfied. Please use caution with the conclusions that are being drawn with the 5-item scales. If you could address that comment, please.
Sure. So this is something that I think there's as somebody who works a lot in surveys at MAPC, I think there's not a whole lot of consensus about what the moderate category means. And so one of the reasons why we offered the other category for some of the follow-up questions is to get a little bit more detail from folks. But I do think that that in general, my experience with the moderate response is that it's the equivalent of a neutral. It doesn't necessarily mean that folks are completely on board with everything that the question is asking people about, but they're not explicitly negative. So just to give an example, one of the questions was, how well do you think the current DSGD approach to lot coverage creates desirable development and a comfortable and pleasing downtown? And in all of these questions that were framed about how well do you think the current approach is doing, the category that got the most amount of responses was moderately well. And my interpretation of that, and I think this is pretty standard, is that doesn't necessarily indicate a lot of that people are really excited about it, in the sense that if they were, they would have picked extremely or very. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that they're unhappy with it, because if that was the case, they would pick slightly well or not well at all. This is a pretty the sort of like the neutral category in the middle, being the having the biggest response, is pretty consistent with the questions that I've seen. But I think that is a valid point nonetheless. And so in order to get some more information from those folks, the questions that we offered to people as follow-ups, asking them for more specific information, included not just the not well at all or slightly well at all folks, but it also included the moderately well responders. So they got a question asking them for more information about how they were thinking.
Great, thank you, Christian. So I will just go ahead and jump right in. Again, thank you, Christian and Karina, for helping us put this together, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Andrew McNichol, staff planner in Town Hall, and I'll be running through some ideas related to open space, and I'm happy to answer any questions related to such. I will add that it might help you to wait for the entire presentation, as Julie is going to follow me with our ideas and concepts on dimensional and density and waiver thoughts, and how those relate to open space, which is a part of everything that we're thinking of in this holistic view. I will also preface this by saying that the items shown on the slides are not everything related to open space that we're looking to add to the bylaw. For example, section 10.5 is our DSGD bylaw. Section 10.5.9 is specifically open space and rec, and there's a lot of language we'll be looking to add there, but it's very word heavy and doesn't exactly fit the presentation style. But again, I'm happy to explain. So based on this list, there are a few things in our bylaw that we can do to make it known that open space is a desire and a goal as part of our downtown development. While the list may look a bit short, it is very important. And the first thing we can do is define it, which I'll speak more on in just 1 second on the next slide. Following that, we can make it clear that we want it as an allowed use, a by right use, and make it explicit. It's not exactly called out for right now, which is a bit problematic that we found. We can then require it, and we can do that in a few different ways, whether it's through dimensional controls or as a justification for a density waiver that we see a lot of on a lot of our downtown developments, or maybe somehow a combination of both. And then we can also specify it in terms of how it's used, who's using it, public or private, the location and how it relates to the surrounding area, who's managing it, etc. This is somewhat influenced by the above and can be done in zoning language, design guideline language, and maybe even potentially to an extent the decision we issue on projects based on our findings and conditions on such. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. So when we start talking about open space and what we've heard as a desire for such, the first thing that comes to my mind is, in terms of zoning, is what is it? What are we talking about here, and how do we define it? Julie and I are constantly flipping back to our definitions section to make sure something makes sense, it fits a category or similar, and that it's clear. Open space is defined in section 2 of our bylaw, which can apply to the whole town, but here in section 5, we have the opportunity to expand that definition as it specifically relates to our downtown developments. We found 2 subcategories that may help define open space in general, and I'll kind of flip-flop them by starting that the almost obvious one that you first think of in terms of open space is green space. Green space, we want as much as possible to be these green spaces to be vibrant or active and engaging. Something like tree lawns and trees are nice in residential areas, but when we think of our downtown, we do think of vibrancy and usable. So in terms of green space, it can be both active or it can be passive, something like recreational uses such as a park or a playground versus something like a park lit or courtyard where people can enjoy lunch, get out of the office for a bit, which we all love to do as much as possible. But we also don't want to forget landscaping, tree lawns, and all that, and how it can help provide visual breaks or even be used creatively. Green space such as planters can help make attractive storefronts. Street trees do provide shading when walking or resting in an area. And green walls and green roofs are new creative opportunities that some of which we are even seeing here in Reading. So green space and how it's defined will be very important to help us get what we're looking for. And then in addition to green space, we may also think of public spaces, or maybe what I sometimes consider as open to the sky or air. Outdoor dining areas, terraces, wider sidewalks, paths which can include landscaping on them and along them, gathering places with unique features such as public art or water fountains. That could also be interpreted as open space, and these areas aren't always green, though they can be, but they can be decorative in design, such as cobblestone or pavers that fit the area. These places draw you in, you want to be there and you want to use them. And again, we want to define these public spaces in a way to help ensure that that's what we're getting. So we can go ahead to the next slide, please. So with all of that in mind, the next question is, what's the approach to get that open space that we're looking for? And one way of thinking is to just flat out require it in the dimensional controls of a project, which you might see a bit more of on when Julie goes ahead. But we've seen ideas on other bylaws, such as maybe 10 to 15% of a lot area be required to be open space. When something like that is in the dimensional controls, it's important to note that that's required on all projects, which can raise questions such as, does this concept fit on a particular site? Is that too restrictive on every site when it's applied to every site that's looking to be redeveloped? Is it all continuous? Is it a combo? It's just that there are a lot of questions, obviously, that we can get into, but another important to note that when it's in the dimensional controls, an applicant can ask for a waiver from such a 10 or 15% requirement. And if such a waiver was requested, what are we looking for then? How do we look at that? We want open space. We don't really want you to be able to waive it potentially. It's also important to note in dimensional controls, again, when maybe Julie will take a deeper dive, but items such as lot coverage and open space, say 85% versus 15%, are not always mutually exclusive. We've seen in a lot of projects, a lot of the open space on projects actually end up counting towards lot coverage requirements. So they do go hand in hand while also being different and unique. So the other thought of how to get this open space in our downtown developments is to be looking to ask for it as a justification for the density waivers that, as Julie answered on a previous question, we've seen on just about every 40R project so far. Basically, when these projects are not by right, say they require a density waiver or looking for height waivers, we can ask for these open spaces. And what we were thinking of was maybe an amount of square footage based on every unit in excess. So if a project was at 60 units per acre, we'd be looking for 400 to 600 or more square feet of open space. What this would allow for, what we think it would allow for, is more flexibility on the design of the open space, the use of the open space, and all of the items that we kind of went over above. And that's because waiver requests are part of a conversation of why and how it makes sense on the lot and what that public benefit is that we're getting based on the waiver that may or may not be granted to you. Just for example, on a by right project, which again, we haven't seen in terms of density, but if they met a 10% or 15% open space requirement, we may not have as much control on that design, the use, where it is, how it's working. And it, again, as Julie will show you the entire concept that we're thinking of, if it doesn't make sense on a site, an applicant could look for additional and different alternatives in terms of public benefits when asking for a density waiver or similar. So there's a lot more questions and details that go into this. Like I mentioned, the open space language itself, is there requirements of act grade or not act grade? And we'll likely dig into that at the upcoming public hearing on Monday. But I think this is probably a good place to stop, answer any preliminary questions, potentially do the polling, and pass it off to Julie. So thank you all again.
So Andrew, I don't see any questions in the Q&A. So I think we can have Christian go ahead and launch the poll. Oh, just give me 1 second to update this. 1 second.
Andrew, we did get one question in the Q&A just now.
Yes, reading it right now. I can't exactly speak to as much of the density on a town like Belmont or Newburyport. I haven't gone through their decisions on maybe similar 40R or mixed use projects. We have explored options of maybe looking to require a sort of payment in lieu as a term in going to open space, whether it's open space acquisition or improvements. But I think where we ended up with, again, the concept that Julie will dive into in more detail, there's a lot of items that we know that we want in our downtown. And while not every lot can fit everything, parking, open space, design, less density. So we're looking to really be flexible in giving developers and maybe the Cpdc in town options of what makes sense on a site. Of course, there's opportunities to acquire open space through park grants or similar that other towns have done, such as, I believe it was Chelsea who did it right next to a 40R and was able to get a park grant, acquire a piece of land and turn it into a park itself. So there's a lot of creative options out there, but zoning specifically this is what we're looking at.
I can just add that there are quite a range of 40Rs across the Commonwealth. Some have tighter urban fabric than others. Some have, more development than others. Some are more successful than others. It is not unusual, I would say, to have a downtown in a community like Reading that looks and feels like Reading's downtown, whether that's accomplished through 40R smart growth overlay districts or mixed use and multifamily zoning that doesn't comply with 40R. And then I would also say there's 40R minimums that provide some level of consistency across smart growth districts, but there is quite a range. I think that is a very fair statement. I can't comment on specific 40Rs tonight. I'm not prepared to do so. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So Christian, do you want to go ahead and do the poll?
Yes. So in about a second, some of you are probably familiar with this, but in about a second, I'm going to launch a poll. It will have 3 questions in it. They are all multiple choice. You will likely have to scroll down to see the last question, and the poll will pop up on your screen in front of what you're viewing. If you're on your computer, it will pop up as an extra box. If you're on your phone, it will appear over the shared screen, and you'll just respond to the questions if you want to, and then we will close the poll and share the results. So the poll is up, so you should be seeing something. If you aren't, and you're on a computer, the box might have popped up under your screen, so check there as well. All right, so I'm starting to see some responses come in. Which is awesome. All right, about half of folks in attendance have participated. So we'll give it maybe a few more, maybe 10 to 15 more seconds. All right, if you are still working on it, now is the time. So in about 10 seconds, I'm going to end the poll. All right. And poll. So I'm going to end the poll. I am going to share the results. So as you can see, in response to the first question regarding open space, which of these options do you want? Select all, vote apply. There is a pretty even-ish split among all of the choices, but requiring it is the answer that most people liked, although this was multiple choice, which is why those percentages don't add up to 100. So essentially what that means is that 81% of folks who answered this question said that they wanted to require open space, but seems like any of these choices would be good choices. Are you interested in requiring open space in exchange for a density waiver? Most folks seemed extremely or very interested. And are you interested in requiring minimum open space as a percentage of lot area? Again, most folks seemed very or extremely interested. And in both instances, no one said not interested at all. So there we go. Over to you, Julie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Julie Mercier, Community Development Director for the Town of Reading. I see a lot of familiar names on the call, and that's exciting to me. So I just want to start by saying that, as you all are probably aware by now, Cpdc hearing is on Monday. So the Cpdc themselves haven't gone through a lot of these ideas from staff yet. And given us feedback on them. So some of the things that I'm going to show, can you advance the slide for me, please? Especially regarding density and like specific numbers in the dimensional table, you know, our ideas at this point. These are all ideas at this point. Whether these numbers are the right numbers, whether we can do some things in the dimensional control table and some things in the waiver section. You know, some of them will work together, some of them won't. So I just, what we're trying to do tonight is really get a feel for, you know, whether you think we're going in the right direction, whether you like the ideas we're talking about. And then of course, like the CPDC hearing process will work to try to refine them and figure out what those numbers or what those metrics really should be. So in terms of density, because we did hear that there are a number of people in the community that feel that there's room for improvement on how we handle density. We can look at a fairly prescriptive approach, which would be making some changes to the dimensional controls in the table that you see before you. So, you know, there's different ways to regulate density, and all of these things work together. So lot coverage, setbacks, minimum open space, they all work on a site to kind of control what ends up being built, and within that built envelope, you know, that translates into some sort of density for these projects. So you'll see here that the two ideas from the instructional motions are included in what we're talking about. The 85% maximum lot coverage that was proposed, as well as the minimum side or rear setback abutting a residential zone or residential property being 15 feet. And then we had some other ideas, for example, like, do we want to put a minimum open space requirement in the table? And the 10% number is just, again, just a number. And as Andrew mentioned, the 10% open space doesn't necessarily translate to 90% lot coverage. They're not necessarily, they don't always add up to 100%. Many of the projects we've seen, like postmark their courtyard, that nice open space is actually part of their building footprint, so it's included in the lot coverage. Same with the Ace Flats courtyard, and many of the projects that we've seen. So 10% is just the number we put out there. We looked at what that would look like on the average and median lots in town. And we will have a further, more robust conversation with CPDC if they do decide they want to put something in the table here regarding that. And then one other thing to mention is, it doesn't, just because it's in the table doesn't mean that we're confined to or constrained to using percentages, right? So we could look to something like a certain amount of square feet per a certain amount of units, or it could be some other metric that's in the table. And then one important point that I wanted to make about things that are put in the table, and in the parens we have the word prescriptive, because this would apply to all projects. All projects need to comply with things that we have in our dimensional controls table, even the by right projects that might meet the density required by the state. So, you know, and if they don't meet these dimensional controls, then they would want to seek a waiver, right? So, but it's a generally more prescriptive approach to put something in the table, and it may or may not work on every site, and it may or may not be result in the smartest kind of development that we're looking for in our smart growth district. So just some ideas, and if you can move on to the next slide, please. Other ideas that we have are to actually look at the waiver justifications. And currently in the bylaw, there are 5 different waiver justifications. And what we're thinking of doing is expanding that. So essentially what the waiver justifications, what that means is that when a development needs a waiver for any of the dimensional controls, they need to, there's different things they can do to prove that they deserve that waiver, right? So we have, the CPDC has a lot of leverage with the waivers, deciding what they are and how they're used to shape projects that the town wants or desires. So what we, and you know, what we've seen and what's been discussed actually as the CPDC has reviewed some projects recently is, you know, if the minimum density required by the state is 20 units per acre, but all the projects that are coming in are asking for more than that, we should be asking for more in return. So through those conversations, Andrew and I have gleaned, and through the survey results and the feedback we've gotten over the years, we've gleaned some different priorities that the town is interested in. And we tried to categorize them within different tiers of density. Again, like the CPDC hasn't discussed these. So they might think that the priorities are different and these things might end up in different places, or maybe they won't like the idea at all. But this tonight is just to get a sense from you if you feel like we're heading in the right direction with what we're thinking. So tier 1 density would be, as we've defined it, like a 21 to 40 dwelling units per acre, and that's what DUA is. And so that would be a project that is seeking a density in that range, right, which is more than the by right density of 20 units per acre. And we would require them to provide at least one of the following in the list here. So street level retail and restaurants, and that's actually in the current bylaw. Preservation or rehabilitation of historic properties or other buildings considered significant to the town, and that's also in the current bylaw. And then visitor parking, that's a new one. And greater setbacks than required on at least 2 sides, and that's a new one. So that would be the first tier for that level of density right there. Next slide, please. So tier 2 takes it to another level of density, and which is 41 to 60 dwelling units per acre. And so in addition to meeting one of the criteria from the first tier, right, a project that wants a density between 41 and 60 units per acre would need to provide one of the metrics here. So energy efficient buildings and construction methods, and that's in the current bylaw. And with the new revision, we'd actually be looking to be more specific about what we mean, and to maybe require even more than like what current developers can achieve fairly easily within the Massachusetts State Building Code. So we're looking at some different standards that are out there today to figure out what we would mean by that more specifically. And then the other option is they could provide open space at a rate of no less than 10 square feet for each unit per acre in excess of 20 dwelling units per acre, right? So this actually takes them back to that like minimum, right? So anything that any density they're requesting above the minimum, they would need to provide a certain amount of open space for. And Andrew showed this on his slide. And then there's a certain amount of that we would want to be publicly accessible, right? So that's a conversation the CPDC would have to have as well, is what's the right amount to have be publicly accessible. Okay, next slide, please. So tier 3 is the next level, 61 to 80 dwelling units per acre. And again, in addition to meeting at least one of the criteria from tier 2, and at least, wait, hold on. One requirement plus both tier 2 requirements, or at least one requirement of each tier and at least one. Okay, I made this confusing, but I'm not even following my own logic. But so in addition to tier 1 and tier 2 criteria, to get a dwelling, a density of 61 to 80 units per acre, they would need to meet at least one of the following here as well. So a shared parking initiative and space for existing commercial tenants. So if there's existing tenants that are successful businesses, figuring out a way to be able to bring them back once post-development, deeper or broader affordability. So in that sense, we mean like deeper would be providing units that are available to households earning incomes of 50% area median income or less. And then broader affordability would just be like going beyond the requirement for a certain number of units at 80% area median income and maybe making that more expansive. So providing more units at 80%, and then rooftop solar. So this list will likely be changing and expanding, and there, I'm sure, are many other good ideas for things we can ask for in these developments. And this is just a start, as I mentioned. So I think that's all for me, unless there's another slide I'm not remembering. I
No,
suppose.
that's it. That's it before the poll questions. So we'll just pause for a minute to see if folks have additional questions they want to put in the Q&A. We answered a couple there, so folks can go and check out what's been answered already pertaining to Julie's slides. But we'll wait just a little bit longer, see if we get any additional ones, and then we'll open up the poll for feedback.
So just while we're waiting, I'll just keep talking. So one of the advantages to having these different waiver criteria and giving choices, it gives developers flexibility to figure out what works within their pro forma and what works within certain site constraints. It's not just a one size fits all approach.
Okay, and we can't share all of the tiers on one page because that's not how the slides are set up, but we can go through them once more and give people a second to read through them on their own before we open the poll. So this is tier 1. We'll linger here for just a little longer. And this is tier 2. And this is tier 3. Okay, and I think with that, we can open the poll question.
Great. So same instructions as before. You'll see a poll pop up. There are 2 questions on this. You may have to scroll down again, so just keep that in mind. All right, poll is launched. All right. So about 82% of folks have responded. So I'll give it maybe 15 more seconds just to make sure if folks are still thinking that they have the chance to respond. All right, so in about 5 seconds, I'm going to end the poll. And so now I'll share the results. So in response to the first question, which is, are you interested in changing dimensional controls? Most people responded that they were extremely interested, and then equal amounts vary and moderately, and fewer with somewhat or not at all. And then, are you interested in a tiered approach to requiring community benefits in exchange for a density waiver? A similar spread, although there was one more person who said they were extremely interested in this than in the previous question. And no one said that they were not interested at all. All right, back to you, Karina.
Great, thank you, Christian. Now, David, to answer your question, we don't have a public document comparing downtown zoning districts at this time, although that would be a great product for us to produce. So maybe we'll put it in the queue for future projects. But it's just background research for other zoning initiatives. So I'm gonna say that was answered. There are, at the height of the event tonight, there was 30 people participating in the webinar, Sarah. And then I'm not sure if town staff want to take a look at the other couple questions in the Q&A right now before we move on to next steps.
I can answer Naomi, who's asked, are there any examples in the state that have used a tiered approach, such as the one we presented tonight? And I have not found any such examples. It seems to be a fairly new concept that we're introducing, but I will keep digging into some of the other 40 art communities to see if there's something similar.
I would say, for what it's worth, MAPC hasn't seen an approach quite like this one. It does strike me as a very elegant and sophisticated approach to the zoning to require or leverage the kind of community benefits that Reading is looking for. And I think it more or less sidesteps the issue of development feasibility as well under 40R, which is an added benefit. All right, so I think those are all the questions in the Q&A function. I'm going to turn it back to Julie to go over next steps.
Thank you, Karina. So again, the public hearing at the CPDC opens at 8:30 p.m. Monday, December 6th. The meeting starts at 7:30 as usual. There is some other business that will happen beforehand. The meeting is hybrid, so it will be in the select board meeting room and also available over Zoom. The full proposed amendments from staff have been posted to the CPDC website. They were posted earlier today. So if you go to the town readingma.gov site, drop down under boards, go to CPDC and look over on the left-hand side. There's a link to meeting documents for December 6th, and the full proposal is there. So you can take a look at that. Be prepared with all your questions and ideas and thoughts, and please join us at the hearing. And then that hearing is most certainly not going to happen, not going to be complete in one night. So we have a couple dates in January, January 10th and January 24th. I expect they'll both be at least partly used to continue the conversation before anything is prepared for the town meeting warrant in April. So those are the next steps for now. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us and for being actively participating in this process as we've spent many months working through these changes. So
thank you, Julie. And I'll just reiterate one of the answers to one of the questions earlier. There will be materials from this project on the project website, that readingma.gov/your-downtown. And so we'll make sure that the town has the slides and other materials, and you can check back on that website to look at them yourself at your leisure. So thank you, everyone. It's been great answering your questions tonight and seeing how you've received these early ideas for zoning proposals from the town. And I will be eager to hear how the hearing proceeds. Have a good night, everyone.
thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.
And thank you to Karina and Christian.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.